Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog, and this is week 3 of the Line Drawing Socks Knit Along hosted by my friends at Makers Mercantile. This week we are going to be knitting the toe of our sock, and this is probably the fastest section of the pattern to knit because the toe of the sock is going to be 25 rounds or less depending on the size of sock that you're making. And also we're decreasing the number of stitches in many of the rounds from the foot down to the tip of the toe. For this pattern, I chose to use what's called 4-point or 4-corner shaping. So as you're knitting the toe of your sock around and around, you will notice that there are 4 distinct places in the rounds where we are going to be doing our decreases. And this leads to there being 4 corners here up at the tip of the sock toe. Now there are lots and lots of ways that knitters can shape the toe of a sock. And I chose this particular method for a number of different reasons. First of all, you'll notice as you're working that the decreases for the sock toe are not going to be made at the sides of the sock, and they're not going to happen at needle changes. Since there are no decreases at the side of the toe, we have a very smooth stockinette fabric here, so there's nothing that's going to rub or irritate the sides of our toes as we're wearing the sock. Also, these decreases are not going to happen at needle changes. And this is going to be true if you are using the Addi FlexiFlips like I am, or even if you chose to knit your sock using double pointed needles or to use the magic loop method on a long circular needle. None of the decreases happen at needle changes. And this is important because anytime you are decreasing stitches right at a needle change, it can be kind of tricky to maintain your yarn tension right there. So hopefully this makes it a little bit easier. Since the decreases are going to happen at the center of your needle, it'll be a little bit easier just to maintain your tension as you're shaping the toe. I also chose this method because the toe shaping that we're doing this week is going to match the heel shaping that we're doing next week. The heel also uses a 4-point, 4-corner method to shape the heel. I like this particular shaping method because it gives you the toe of your sock a little bit more rounded shape. And that's good because it gives a better fit for a larger range of foot types than when you use wedge shaping, which is just diagonal slants here at the sides of the toe. And my last reason I chose this, I just think this method is kind of pretty. As you are knitting your sock, make sure to see that for this section, each size is going to have its own set of directions for the toe. So just find in the pattern the size that you're making and follow the directions for that size. Throughout the toe shaping, you're going to knit a certain number of rounds, and then you'll see a series of stitches in brackets for the decrease rounds. And on the decrease rounds, you'll work that series of bracketed stitches 2 times. The first time you work the series of bracketed stitches, it's going to be for the stitches that are here across the top of the foot. The second time you work the bracketed stitches, it is going to be here across the stitches on the bottom of your foot. One final thing I want to mention before we start knitting is that as we're doing our decreases, you're going to notice that they're all paired. You have one decrease that slants to the left, followed by a decrease that slants to the right. And this is going to be true with 2 exceptions. For the very first decrease round of size small and the very first decrease round of size large. For those 2 sizes, in your first decrease round that you work, you're only going to have one single decrease at each of the 4 points in your sock toe. going to start knitting on the toe of my sock, and I will be right back to show you how to do the slip knit pass over and knit slip pass over decreases that we're going to be using. I've made a little bit of progress on the toe of my sock, and now I'm ready to demonstrate the two decreases that we're going to be using. The SKP, or slip knit pass over, and the KSP, knit slip pass over. So first, the SKP, slip knit pass over. This decrease is going to slant to the left. So first we slip a stitch knitwise from left to right, knit the next stitch, and then pass over that slipped stitch over the stitch that we just worked. And you're basically just binding off that stitch. Now for the KSP, or knit slip pass over, and this decrease is going to slant to the right. So first we're going to knit a stitch. We're going to slip it back from our right needle back onto the left without twisting it. And then we're going to pass over the second stitch that's on our left needle over the top of the first. And again, this is basically just binding off that stitch, and then return the stitch we knit from left to right purlwise this time without twisting it. And you can see that that one slants to the right. So I'm going to knit across to my next pair of decreases, and then I'll demonstrate those one more time for you. So first we're going to do the SKP, slip knit pass over, slip the stitch knitwise, knit a stitch, and pass the slipped stitch up and over the one you just knit. And then our second decrease is a KSP, knit slip pass over. So knit the first stitch, slip it back without twisting, pass over the second stitch that's on your left needle up over the top of the one you just knit, and then return that stitch you knit back to the right needle, and you're slipping purlwise this time so you're not twisting it. That's it. That's how to make the decreases. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to knit up to the tip of the toe, and then I'll show you how we're going to finish things off. When you finish knitting the toe of your sock, you're going to have 8 stitches left on your knitting needles. And at that point, you can cut or break your yarn so that you have a tail that's 12 to 18 inches long. You just want something that's long enough that you can weave it in here. And then we're going to take that tail and thread it onto our yarn needle. And now we're going to draw our yarn needle through these last 8 stitches in the same order that we've been knitting them. So we'll start with the stitches here at the front of the foot and draw the yarn through, and then the stitches at the back of the foot. So I'm going to slide the stitches down to the end of my knitting needle, just like I was getting ready to work them actually. Make sure your tail isn't twisted up around any of the knitting needles. And then just take your yarn needle and one by one you're going to draw it through the stitches on your knitting needle, and you can drop them off the knitting needle as you're going through them. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'll drop off that first knitting needle and draw my yarn tail through. And don't close it up super tight quite yet, because we're going to have one more thing we need to do. I'm going to turn my sock over and then go through the 4 stitches that are at the bottom of the foot. And again, you're just slipping them from your knitting needle onto the yarn needle in the same order that they would be knit. 1, 2, 3, 4, pull the yarn needle through, and you can see here now, let me put my hand through the sock. You can see here up at the tip of the toe, we have a little hole. And of course, you don't want to leave a hole in the toe of your sock. So just take your yarn needle right down through the center of that hole. And my yarn needle came off, but that's okay. I'm going to grab the tail on the inside of the sock, hopefully. And when I grab that tail and pull, I'm just going to make sure it's not tangled on any stitches, and I'm just pulling the yarn tail down to the inside of the sock, and you can see everything just tightens right up, and you have no more hole at the tip of the toe, and everything is closed up beautifully. So at this point, you can go ahead and turn your sock so that it's inside out, and you can weave in that yarn tail from the toe on the inside. And at this point, you could also take and weave in the yarn tail that you had from your cast on edge. I hope you've enjoyed week 3 of the Line Drawing Socks Knit Along. Next week, we are going to be finishing things up and knitting the heel of our sock. Since there wasn't a whole lot of knitting this week, if you feel like you have a little bit of extra time, this may be a great opportunity for you to start your second sock. And you have a couple options as you start your second sock. If you want the striping pattern to be in the same order, although it may not start in the exact same spot in the color work, you can go ahead and continue working with the same end of the yarn that you have been knitting the first sock. If you'd like to reverse this striping pattern, go ahead, reach into the center of your yarn ball, grab the tail, and you can start knitting from the other end, and it will reverse this striping pattern for the second sock. If you have any questions or you'd like to share your progress during the knit along, head over to the Makers Mercantile group on Ravelry and look for the Line Drawing Socks KAL discussion. And if you're working the sock after the knit along is over, you can go ahead and leave your questions in the comments below this video on YouTube. You can share pictures of your sock anytime on social media. Just make sure to add hashtag Line Drawing Socks KAL and go ahead and tag me at the Chili Dog and at Makers Mercantile so we can stop by and say hi. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!